Sometime around 850 CE, a group of Scandinavian seamen, maybe intentionally, maybe driven off course, stumbled upon the large volcanic island of Iceland. At just over 100,000 square kilometers, the volcanic island contained lush birch-forested lowlands, extensive highland grazing, and plenty of fresh water flowing down from numerous glaciers. Best of all, the island was uninhabited, a vast open expanse ready for the taking, one of the last major land masses to be discovered and settled by humans. Or was it? Although a pristine Iceland open for the taking has long been the accepted view, evidence to the contrary is scattered everywhere and has been growing. Both the Icelandic book and the Book of Settlements, early sagas detailing Iceland's discovery, mention Christian monks already living there. Renowned for their wanderings, or peregrinato, medieval Irish monks sailed the British Isles in leather-bottomed boats in search of rocky, isolated isles where they could lead an ascetic, hermit lifestyle. Monasteries such as Skellig Michael, off the southwest coast of Ireland, and North Rona, lie precariously on top of tiny islets, containing just moss and seagulls. But Iceland is over 1,000 kilometers away from Ireland. Could Irish monks in primitive craft really have made it there? Drawing on primary source analysis, modern archaeological excavations by Dr. Christian Aronson, and analysis of the popular medieval tale, The Voyages of Saint Brendan, what follows, will show that not only were Irish monks present in Iceland at its discovery, but it had been well known to the Irish for centuries, and not exceedingly difficult to get to. Early Norse sagas unambiguously endorse this view. The 11th century Icelandic book, written by the priest Svanur Thorkelsson, describes the discovery and Christianization of Iceland, and indicates that at the time of discovery there were strange people called Papar, already living there, believed to be Christians. However, they later went away, because they did not wish to stay here with heathens, and they left behind them Irish books and bells and staffs. From this, it could be seen that they were Irishmen. Whether they were driven out or left of their own accord is left to the reader to decide. The Book of Settlements, an 11th century saga listing every single settler and settlement during Iceland's land name, that is settlement phase, relates the same information about the Papar as the Icelandic book, that at the time of Iceland's discovery they found people with Irish books, bells, croziers and lots of other things, who promptly departed upon the arrival of the Norse. Settlements, however, goes one step further, claiming that the Tula described by the Venerable Bede in his work, De Temporibus, is in fact Iceland. Bede's Tula, for according to Settlements, the land has neither daylight there in the winter, nor darkness when the day is at its longest in summer. This is why the learned reckon that Tula must really be Iceland. As the Venerable Bede died more than 120 years prior to Iceland's Norse discovery, the Book of Settlements suggests that Iceland, or Tula, was already well known to the Irish, and further claims that voyages to and from Iceland regularly occurred in the pre-Norse era. This view is supported by the Liber de Mentura or Bisteri, a geographic text prepared for the early 9th century Carolingian court by the Irish monk Dicuil, who claims that clerics travelled to the Faroe Islands and Iceland between February and August of 795 CE, a date that, as we will see, is very important. Tula itself has a long and rich history, having first been mentioned by the Greek Marseillan explorer and naturalist Pytheas, who apparently reached it during a 4th century BCE voyage, north from the Pillars of Hercules. Tula's exact location is a mystery. It could have been the Shetland Islands, Orkneys, or Norway, but the idea of Tula as an exotic, fantastical northern land at the very edges of the known world animated the Roman imagination. Saint Brendan, an Irish monk living from 484 until 577, was renowned in the medieval world for being a peerless navigator, explorer, and missionary. Although he founded monasteries such as Ardfert and Clonfert in the Scottish Isles, two popular medieval works, the Vitu Brendani, or Life of Saint Brendan, and the Navigatio Sancti Brendani Abbatis, or Voyages of the Abbot Saint Brendan, depict voyages to far-off islands where Brendan and his crew of monks encounter strange natives, enormous and terrifying sea life, and bizarre landscapes such as the impassable Liver Sea, which was something resembling the lungs of the sea, where both land and sea and everything in sight went up and down. The tales were enormously popular. If Brendan covered large distances, writes preeminent Brendan researcher Clara Strige Bosch, so did stories about him, both through time and geographic space. They are found everywhere on the European continent and were to inspire people to undertake ocean voyages and exploration well into the 20th century. The St. Brendan stories are part of the medieval Irish literary genre, known as Imrama, in which ecclesiastical sailors voyage from island to island, during which the travellers encounter a mixture of the helpful and agreeable with the threatening and pernicious. Although the St. Brendan stories are clearly fantastical allegories rich with Christian symbolism, some of the islands depicted resemble real-life places in the North Sea and North Atlantic, leading some, including prominent explorer Tim Severin, to believe that the Brendan myths contain kernels of truth, suggesting a wider range of medieval Irish exploration than previously thought possible. On May 17, 1976, a curious ship sailed out of Brendan Creek, in southwest Ireland, headed into the cold Atlantic. Manned by a crew of 4 and captained by explorer Tim Severin, the Brendan was built using 49 tanned and greased ox hides stretched over an oak frame, held together with 2 miles of leather twine and stitched with 23 miles of flax thread, all assembled using purely medieval methods and materials. Based on a medieval Irish ship design called a curragh, the ship was built to prove that the mythical voyages of St. Brendan, taking place in the 5th century, could indeed have reached the Faroe Islands, Iceland, and even Newfoundland, which Severin claimed was the mythical St. Brendan's island. Guided by favourable winds and mild weather, the Brendan reached the Faroe Islands, 300 kilometres due north of Scotland, in 4 weeks, with the ship averaging a speed of 9 knots, a brisk pace. The Faroes, known as Island of the Sheep in Old Norse, are a Danish possession first settled by Vikings around 800 CE, though considerable archaeological evidence exists that shows they may have been first settled 400 years earlier. Indeed, the voyage of St. Brendan describes a group of islands similar to the Faroes that are full of sheep and birds. The Faroes, aside from having many sheep, are also a major resting place for migratory birds. From the Faroes, the crew of the Brendan sailed northwest to Iceland, a 500 kilometers distance which they covered in just 9 days, guided by swift ocean currents. The voyage describes Brendan coming across a rugged and rocky island, full of smiths' forges. The island blew up into mighty flames, so that the whole island seemed one globe of fire, and the sea on every side boiled up and foamed. Iceland, a vigorously active volcanic island located on the Icelandic volcanic hotspot, experiences regular eruptions almost yearly. Could this be what voyage is describing? Although the crew of the Brendan eventually reached Newfoundland in their medieval craft, the Iceland-Canada leg of their journey took 7 weeks and was beset by gales and ice packs, necessitating frequent contact by radio with the Greenlandic and Canadian Coast Guards, rendering Severin's hypothesis inconclusive. Modern nautical charts were used throughout the voyage. Despite this, the relatively easy journey from Ireland to Iceland in just over 1 month shows without question that the medieval Irish had the requisite navigational skill and technology to reach Iceland. The leather hull, far from being a liability, hardened almost to steel in the cold North Atlantic waters, yet remained supple enough to land easily on rock-strewn Arctic shores. Between May 2001 and September 2002, a team of archaeologists led by Dr. Christian Aronson descended on a small area of southwestern Iceland known as Silja Land. This region, marked by an escarpment jutting into the sea, is the site of nearly 200 artificial caves cut into the soft palagonite, sandstone substrate. Ranging in size from small individual shelters to 2-story chambers, these caves are decorated by thousands of crosses, cut laboriously into the walls with iron-tipped tools. Although used by local farmers for centuries for storage and livestock, the question of who built the caves and for what reason has mystified locals and researchers alike, although an oral tradition linking some of the caves to the Papar exists. To this end, Dr. Aaronson's team arrived with a simple objective: to date the caves and examine the crosses within to determine whether or not these caves predate the Norse colonization of Iceland around 870 AD. Before discussing the results of the dating, some peculiar elements of the caves were noted. The location of the caves, first of all, appears non-random. The Scilly Island escarpment is the most visually prominent landmark along Iceland's southern coast, and would have provided a ready navigational bearing for any sailor arriving from the south. Further, small buildings around the archaeological site, especially at the very summit of the escarpment, strongly resemble early Christian drystone hermit cells, built in the tiny, isolated islet of North Rona, off the northern coast of Scotland. As well, the topographical distribution of the caves strongly suggests that they were constructed as primary sites with a different focus of settlement to the traditional farming landscape. In short, they were not built by or for farmers, who formed the vast majority of Iceland's original pagan settlers. Iceland, happily for archaeologists, is almost uniquely well situated for providing accurate geological dating. Its frequent volcanic activity covers the island in fine tephra, a volcanic airfall, which creates visibly distinct layers in the substrate, allowing for accurate dating within plus or minus 15 years. Furthermore, a major eruption occurred around the time of the first settlement, circa 870 CE, coating the area in a heavy, black layer known as the land gnome tephra. This layer makes it very simple to determine pre- and post-settlement geological dates. A deep cave known as Kvikahetlir was chosen for dating, because of easy access and high rates of sediment accumulation. Entrance to the Kvikahetlir cave. But how are caves such as Kvikahetlir even dated? Their very interior nature would seem to preclude the build-up of airborne sediment. The dating of artifacts found within the cave is also unreliable, as these caves have been reused for agricultural purposes almost continually for 1,000 years. Indeed, board farmhands frequently carved names and dates into the cave walls. The answer, then, was to find the waste site from the cave's construction and date the sediment layers on top, using a predictive analysis model of the apron, or worksite fringe. This accomplished, samples from the waste site were then collected and sent to the University of Iceland Research Centre for Geochemical Analysis. As for evaluating the crosses found inside the caves, two major problems appeared. First, as alluded to before, the date of cross-cutting is not necessarily indicative of a first inhabitation date, and their carving carries no waste site which can be dated. Furthermore, despite claims of Celtic crosses being found, virtually all the crosses are simple images, two straight lines carved into the stone with little to no adornment. Although the Scilly Island crosses do seem related to pre-Viking Age early Christian crosses found in western Scotland, their simplicity precludes any stylistic categorization which might offer a dating range. Unfortunately, the defining image of these caves cannot offer conclusive proof as to their makers. After exhaustive geochemical analysis of the waste site, Dr. Aronson concluded, with a high degree of certainty, that the Kvikahetlir cave, and by extension, the other Scilly Island caves, cannot have been built less than several decades prior to Iceland's Norse discovery, with around 800 CE date, being most likely. This nearly matches de Keul's voyage date of 795 CE, and proves beyond a reasonable doubt that a human, likely Christian, presence existed in Iceland well before its Norse settlement. In light of the above evidence, primary sources, medieval myth, modern exploration, and above all archaeological results, the conclusion seems clear, and to my mind, overwhelming: the Vikings were not the first ones to reach Iceland. That honor, as the weight of evidence strongly suggests, belongs to an anonymous, fearless group of seafaring Irish monks.